What's up, guys? Welcome to a special edition, I guess, of Tidal Gardens. In this video, I want to kind of go over all the video equipment that goes into making this channel possible. I realize that this channel is primarily reef aquarium based, so this is quite the non sequitur, but a lot of people out there are interested in kind of the gear that goes into making all the visuals of this channel possible. I gotta say that over the years, the audio-visual aspect of the channel has become a new hobby of sorts that kind of sprung up from the reef aquarium side of things. So it all kind of originated from just me wanting to post nice pictures. And that's kind of how I got started into this whole thing. And eventually, photography turned to videography. And that completely changed everything. I would credit this YouTube channel for a lot of why Tidal Gardens is successful. I don't think that there's any question, in fact. Without this channel, nobody would know who the heck I was. The YouTube channel had introduced me already. In that sense, it's been, pretty remarkable. So before I get into any of the equipment stuff, I have to give a shout out to my friend and fellow YouTuber, Tech Gear Talk. His name is Sagi, and his channel is growing like gangbusters. He is an incredibly talented YouTuber. His channel focuses around consumer electronics, mainly cameras now. He wanted to do like a more broad overview of different types of technologies. And the YouTube algorithm says, no, you're a camera guy. Much like the YouTube algorithm has dictated, I'm the coral guy. So if you like consumer electronics, especially the camera stuff, please go check out his channel. You'll see what I'm talking about. And I happened to have gone over to his place, and he was kind enough to film a lot of the B-roll for this equipment in his very distinctive style. So thanks again, Sagi. Appreciate it. As far as the equipment goes, let's get started with the big elephant in the room. What is the camera that I use? The camera is a Canon C200, which is, I would say, their mid-level professional cinema series camera. Now, I didn't start into the cinema series with this camera, which is what's shooting this video. I started with a Canon C100, which is this guy right here. This is their 1080p HD entry level. This is the 100 millimeter macro, which shoots just about every single video on this channel practically. That's coral anyway. We can talk about the lenses a little bit later, but the big difference between going from a point and shoot or even a DSLR camera to a dedicated cinema camera, it was like a night and day difference. A lot of what makes a cinema camera like fantastic is the workflow. Usually with like a DSLR, it's a stills camera that happens to shoot video. With that, you kind of run into some complications once you want to start veering away from just the stills aspect of the camera. For example, this camera here has professional audio input. These are usually an XLR connection. There are like some consumer grade microphones that you could put on, but really once you get into the professional side of things, all the professional audio is going to be XLR based. Having direct XLR connection with the controls for everything, for volume control, and also being able to see audio meters and stuff like that, it's pretty specialized to one of these cameras. It's possible to get that functionality onto a regular DSLR, but oftentimes it's its own like audio preamp that you kind of mount to the bottom of the camera, and then maybe you want like a lighting solution, maybe you want all these other things like a side monitor like that's larger than this even, and suddenly you're starting to build out a bigger and more expensive camera package. And if you were kind of going down that road anyway, oftentimes investing in an actual cinema camera that has all that stuff built in, it's kind of nice because you end up avoiding a lot of the clutter. It's a lot more seamlessly integrated into a camera like this. Now the other thing, which is kind of going to be hard to show you, is the neutral density filters, which is this control right here. Don't know if I can like hold it up and have you see it on camera there. But you see these guys here as I flip through? So these guys are neutral density filters. And oftentimes what happens is when you are trying to shoot, let's say, a very bright scene, and you want to blur the background out. So the way that you typically blur the background is to use like a very large aperture. When you use a large aperture, what happens is you open the lens wide open and you let in a lot of light. The problem is if you're like out in noonday sun, for example, you can't just open your lens wide open. All you will see is a white screen at that point. If you've ever seen like a big movie camera, like something like Steven Spielberg is like sitting behind, let's say, you'll see like a giant matte box in front of the lens. And they use like these neutral density filters on something like that. So theoretically, again, if you're using a DSLR, you could get a matte box or a neutral density filter that you can thread in, but generally speaking, those aren't quite as good. You'd have to kind of come to some third-party solution to fix the lighting issue. But like the better cinema cameras have it all built in. That's just an example of a feature that you might kind of overlook in a camera that you do get in cinema cameras. The other thing that cinema cameras taught me is that specs aren't always meaningful. I'll give you kind of an aquarium example of what I'm talking about. If you buy a pump, there's going to be a flow rating and a head pressure rating for that pump. And let's say it says that it can do 3,000 gallons per hour at such and such head. And there's going to be another pump that has a much lower flow rating and a similar head pressure rating. And you can actually see these graphs that kind of show these pumps' performance. It's entirely possible that the pump that says that it can do 300 gallons per hour is going to be greatly outperformed by the pump that just says it can do 1,000 gallons per hour. It happens all the time. It happens with skimmer ratings. Like this skimmer over here is rated at 500 gallons. This skimmer over here is rated at 120 gallons. And the one that's rated for the smaller aquarium outperforms the other one. So there's all these kind of goofy specs that are kind of floating around in the aquarium hobby. Similarly for cameras, just because a camera says that it can do 4K is practically irrelevant. For example, a lot of new phones say they can do 4K. And to some degree, you know, the pixels do count up. There are 4K pixels, but the problem is it's still a trash image at the end of the day. Whereas with a cinema camera, even when you're talking about like a 1080p picture, again, this here's a 1080 camera. This 1080p camera is going to vastly outperform most 4K cameras. The picture quality, the color depth, that's why you end up seeing, like on the set of Star Wars, probably a $70-something thousand cinema camera and not an iPhone. It's like these specs, they don't line up. There's a whole bunch of stuff that simply does not make the spec sheet, but you see it on screen. The other thing that I was thinking about as far as like going with a 4K camera like the C200 here, is 4K really that important right now? Probably not. There's not a lot of people with 4K TVs out there. There's not a lot of people with 4K monitors for their computer out there. And 4K on a cell phone is just meaningless practically. In that sense, I guess that 4K is really not that important. But the reason why I decided to go with 4K is I've gotten into the habit of keeping all of the footage I shoot. That has saved my butt so many times to be able to go back in time and find the right shot to tell the story that I'm trying to tell. There's plenty of times where I've shot something, it's hadn't worked out for whatever reason, and 2 to 3 years later, it's like, oh my gosh, that is the perfect shot to fit into this narrative that I'm doing now. By shooting in 4K now, I've kind of future-proofed my content in like 4 or 5, 6 years from now, when 4K is a much more established video production standard. I'll have all of this stuff that I can draw upon. There's a couple big downsides to my upgrading from the C100 to the C200. The main thing is at the time I was editing on my laptop. I was able to do it successfully with the 1080p footage I was getting from the C100. But once I switched to the C200, I couldn't even get it to play back. I mean, my laptop basically just said, no, we're not going to do this. That's not part of the plan. I was immediately starting to look at new computers, and I eventually had to invest in a major, mega powerhouse Mac Pro. At the time, a lot of my friends were saying, there's no way you need that much power. There's no way. It had like 10 cores. It had 2 graphics cards in it, like monster graphics cards. And those 10 cores are like Intel Xeon processors. They're like workstation class. It didn't take long for me to completely max all that stuff out, because when you're starting to edit 4K footage, I mean, certain functions like stabilization, especially for my live shows, you know, those things that they go on for about 2, sometimes 3 hours, to stabilize all that footage, it takes roughly 5 hours for the computer to churn through that, because this, if you can imagine a 4K image, and you need 60 of these 4K images for 1 second of footage, and you're expanding that out over 2 hours. Like every single frame, this computer has to stabilize 60 times per second for 2 hours. Clearly, processing power is a big deal. So in addition to the camera, I had to invest in a computer to even do anything with the footage. And the next thing is the size of the files coming out of this camera are pretty massive. And I needed to have some kind of storage solution. That got expensive pretty quick as well. I ended up having to invest in a 12-bay, like a Synology RAID. Fill that thing up with like 10 terabyte drives just to hold all of this stuff. Because like I said, if given the choice, I wouldn't delete any of my footage. You never know when your old footage becomes valuable again. Next topic, let's talk about stabilization. One thing that's kind of fun about going from still photography to videography is that you kind of have a lot more creative control by moving the camera through space and time, right? That was like a really cool aspect that I thought. But what ends up happening is, as soon as you move this camera off of like a stable platform like a tripod, you're screwed. You're so screwed. Every little jitter gets captured. And if you've ever watched like jittery, shaking footage, it's pretty unbearable. So let's say you have like a regular phone, right? You can stabilize a phone any number of ways. You can get something like this little Osmo, right? And you slide your phone into there, and you can do your little Instagram Live or whatever, right? Little guy, not bad. But once you get into bigger, heavier cameras, obviously a little 3-axis gimbal like this, it's not going to do the trick. That is when you need something like this guy. So this here is a Movi Pro. You need to kind of invest in one that can handle the weight of a camera system and also is actually smooth doing it. Compared to, I guess, similar sized ones that can handle the weight of the camera, these guys are, just in my experience, a lot smoother, and it immediately shows up in the footage. I've kind of decided to go higher end on this type of stabilizer because at the end of the day, the important thing is to get the shot. It's no fun to go through all this headache of putting the camera on there, balancing it, and not having usable footage, right? This guy served me pretty well. It's a specialized shot to like go through a moving space and all that stuff. The other thing that I use quite a lot more is a motorized slider. I use that all the damn time. If you've watched this channel at all, you've probably noticed several shots per video where I'm doing some type of a parallax slide or bringing the camera slowly down onto the subject, things like that. And if you've watched my live shows lately, every single choral that I shoot involves a parallax slide. Theoretically, you could do that by hand. That would be very challenging. Besides tripods, I would say that's my most impactful type of video stabilization. So let's talk about audio just a little bit. I know quite a bit when it comes to the video side of things. I'm very, very, very weak on the audio side of things. And I'm like a psycho when it comes to trying to get good audio. I'm just bad at it. The first thing that I've kind of had to learn is that audio is kind of a combination of a bunch of different things. You need a good room, you need good microphones, and you need a good audio interface to get from the microphone into the computer. All of this has been a big learning experience. I mean, the audio interface I have now, I'm gonna kind of rate it a C+. It's pretty good. It's a Focusrite Scarlett, and a lot of people use it successfully. It's okay. Now, I tried a universal audio, which is like a lot more expensive, and I got way worse results because I don't know what I'm doing, and honestly, it's like there's only so much you can like learn on the fly about these things when you really just need it to perform well, right? The thing about audio though is that it kind of exposes your weakest link, and after you kind of get the microphone right, after you kind of get like the better recording surround, eventually you get around to the weak link. And right now I think that Focusrite Scarlett is the weak link, but like I said, it was turnkey working, whereas the other one was like, I had all kinds of weird audio issues because, I don't know, I probably had the settings all wrong. So anyway, the three microphones I use. The one that I'm currently wearing is a little Sennheiser lavalier. And this is like a great walk around, run and gun wireless solution. I've got like the transmitter here like tucked into my belt. I've got the receiver on the camera there. And it's a really low profile little black and blue guy. And these guys are just insanely good for like the one-man band, right? So I have two of those, and kind of the nice thing about these cinema cameras is that they have multiple audio inputs for different microphones. So I could hook up, for example, two of those Sennheiser lavaliers. I could hook up a shotgun mic. I could hook up all kinds of stuff. So that's the first mic that I have used. And I use that also for on my live shows when I'm having a guest, and we can both be mic'd up separately. It's kind of nice. The next microphone that I used to use a lot is this guy here. This is the Sennheiser 416 shotgun mic. And I would say that the first, I don't know, 3 or 4 years of doing audio was done using this guy. It is a workhorse, Hollywood standard, legendary microphone. Like this guy's probably been an industry standard for 30 plus years. I kind of call it the Godfather because it came out the same year roughly as like the Godfather movies. Now the reason why I'm not using this guy right now very often is because we had just moved all of my stuff into this new studio space, and the audio in here isn't perfect yet. We're still in the process of filling it up, and we're still in the process of putting more sound treatment on the walls, kind of like this guy right here, right? So we're kind of having to invest more in that. But this mic is so sensitive that it was still picking up tons and tons and tons of reverb, whereas like a lavalier isn't quite so bad. And I have another mic now that we'll cover next that does a much better job of rejecting stuff further away. Like the thing about a shotgun mic is it picks up a whole bunch of stuff from the front, rejects stuff from the side and from the back. But that's what it's picking up from the front side, this cardioid pattern, is still very boomy and echoey. So I've kind of had to shelve this guy for just a little while longer until I can get my room in order. So what I did to replace it was to go with this guy here. This is the Shure SM7B. It is also, in its own right, a legendary microphone. It was used to record Michael Jackson's Thriller, amongst many other things. But coin flip, your favorite podcaster probably uses this mic. It is not that expensive. I think they're like $399 or something like that, as compared to like the 416, which is like $1,000. And many times I see like podcasters not even need this pop filter, but whenever I was recording audio, I noticed that like the plosive stuff was still an issue. But anyway, I love this thing. It has like a very distinctive sound quality to it. I like how my voice sounds on it. And I like that it basically rejects everything that's like 5 feet away or more, which in the case of this room are my walls. It's like not getting quite that room reverb that the Sennheiser 416 was giving me. If you're watching any of my more recent videos, this is the voiceover mic that I've been using. Oh, one thing that I should add about the SM7B is that it's a super like quiet mic. I mean, I remember first plugging it in and like no matter how much I cranked up the gain on it, I could barely like hear anything. And so it turns out that I had to buy this other thing to boost the signal by 25 dB called a cloud lifter. And it's supposed to be clean, but I can hear something. It's either the cloud lifter or it's my Focusrite Scarlett, but I can hear like this audible hiss in there that I then have to remove in post. So yeah, just have to throw that in there. Okay, so let's talk just a little bit about lenses. The nice thing about some of these cameras is that they have the interchangeable lens systems. There are 3 lenses that I use all the time. The first one is the one that's on this camera right now. It's the Sigma 18 to 35 millimeter f1.8 zoom. This lens is kind of it's been kind of nicknamed like the YouTube lens. Pretty much every high-end production on YouTube has some version of this lens, whether it is this one that's currently on my camera or the more expensive like Cine version that has like the gears for focusing and all that stuff. But it is basically this lens. It is a tremendously high-quality lens for a ridiculously low price given how good it is. So usually, like if this was a Canon lens, it would be, I don't know, $2,500 maybe. But since it's a Sigma lens, it's like, I don't know, $600-700. I don't remember exactly. We can look it up later on Amazon. But it's fantastic. And that f1.8 is a very large aperture, which lends in a ton of light. And it's very uncommon to find zoom lenses with an f1.8 aperture. Very, very uncommon. So yeah, it's been a beautiful lens to work with. I love it. Really, really, really good build quality. The second lens that we'll talk about is the 10 to 18 Canon stepper motor version. It's the STM, and it's also image stabilized. And the thing I like about that is that it is a very wide lens. It's great for putting onto like a camera stabilizer. And it's both light and wide angle, so it gives you this dreamlike float through space. I rarely use it because I rarely use the Movi Pro stabilizer just because it's a very niche shot. But it's perfect for that application. And that STM on the lens, that stepper motor, basically means that it's going to be able to focus very quickly and silently, and it also has a better connection to the camera for like face detection and autofocus and things like that. The third lens worth talking about is the 100 millimeter macro. This is the big money maker. Every single photo that Tidal Gardens shoots, pretty much, I mean, I shouldn't say every single photo, that's not true. 99.9% of all the photos we shoot is done with a 100 millimeter lens, whether it's the L version with this red ring means it's like the higher end one. This has an image stabilizer. So for video, it's amazing. The non-L one does not have an image stabilizer, but for still photography, you kind of don't need it because you're on a tripod and you're not moving the camera. As far as like picture quality, they both are very, very, very close. This one has a slight edge according to all the advanced metrics, but they're essentially the same lens, except that this is a stabilized lens. And so for all of my choral video stuff, whenever you're like looking at a particular piece, you're probably looking through this lens. It's the business workhorse. What can I say, right? I mean, it's responsible for all of our inventory shots. It's responsible for, like I said, probably 90-something% of all the video you see on this channel. I can't recommend this enough. This is probably the best macro lens that's out there in the whole market. So the last thing I'll cover is, do I need all of this crazy super high-end gear? For a YouTube channel of my size, probably not. The main reason why I invested in all this stuff isn't just the quality. The quality obviously is a big deal part of it, but most of what this high-end gear provides is smooth workflow, and I can't stress how important that is. So the folks out there that are watching that have a YouTube channel, and you've been doing it a long time, you can probably relate to how difficult sometimes it is to make the next video. Especially if you've made like a couple hundred or maybe like 400 or 500 or even 1,000 videos, getting that next video out, it can be a bit of a struggle. For me, if there's any friction that I rub up against that is production related, I am going to absolutely 100% use that as an excuse to not make a video. Anything that I can invest in that can smooth out any points of friction that would prevent me from making a video, I'm going to try to do. I mean, it gets expensive to do that, but for me, I think it's more important that I keep on making videos. It can be a challenge sometimes to be consistent as a YouTube creator while you have other responsibilities going on. If this one little device out here can make it 10% easier to get that video out, I want it. I didn't cover any of this stuff involving broadcast. Maybe I'll cover that in a different video altogether. There's plenty to talk about there because it's kind of like going from still photography to videography is a big step. But then going from videography to live broadcast is a completely separate thing. Nowadays, you could just use your phone, right? And again, you use what's available to you. To make like a super high-end production, that's when a conversation with me will come in. All right, guys, that's a general overview of some of the camera equipment that I use to make this channel. It's a little bit of a departure from the majority of the content on this channel, but hopefully a few of you out there kind of got something out of this and found it interesting. Thanks again for watching. Please leave a like. If you have any questions, go ahead and leave that in the comments below. And if you haven't subscribed already, please get on that and hit the notification bell because we all know that's like the real subscription button, right?